lay out your thoughts and opinions on this, but I'll pose it as a question. Is Joel Embiid the main problem here as it relates to the 76ers, right? If we're Daryl Morey, if we're Josh Harris, whoever it is for the 76ers, and we're trying to figure out what the best move is for this franchise moving forward, short term and long term, what are we doing to try and get out of the mud? And how do we interpret the Joel Embiid role in all of that?
This is a tough one, man. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously the injuries. If we're going to point the finger and say, well, he's the problem because he can't stay healthy, I mean, sure, that's fair.
Yeah.
But, it's not like these injuries are just like him. They've all been pretty major injuries. He said,
Sure.
and look, you can make an argument that by him coming back last year to try to help his team out, that hurt him even more. So to sit here and say that he's the problem, I don't think that's fair at all. He's been the one guy that has been out there that has tried when he has been healthy. You're only any relevancy because of him. When he played last year, you were the number 2 seed. When he left, you fell into the play-in round. That's how important he is.
Yeah.
So what is the problems on this team? Great question. Here's number one. The crowd that just says it's time to move on from Embiid. I got news for you. That ain't happening. And it's even if every single guy in that organization wants to trade him, nobody's going to take on that contract. So that one is out the window. To say, got to move on from Embiid, he's the problem. I'm sorry. That sounds great, but it's not happening. So you got to start to come up with solutions to what you do have. Can he get back to playing basketball at a level that can help you win? I'm not saying even where he was. That can help you win. Okay, we transition over to Tyrese Maxey. Maybe it's more on him. But the whole, you got to trade Embiid, that's not happening. That's a pipe dream. He is going to make $69 million 4 years from now. Nobody wants that deal.
No, you can keep going. I mean, I have a lot to say, but if you have more to add, you can go.
Well,
go
listen,
ahead.
I know there's a lot of people say he's the problem. Fine. He's part of the problem. He can't stay healthy. That's been part of the problem. Yes, that's one. I see a lot of people going after Josh Harris and the ownership group. Quite frankly, if he didn't own the Washington Commanders, I don't think anybody cares about Josh Harris all that much. They have spent money. It's not like they're
done. Yeah.
It's not like they're cheap. It's not like they haven't tried. Every move they made, whenever the Sixers have done something, I think universally everyone's like, I like that move. They made a great move. They went for it. They traded Ben Simmons for James Harden. We like that move. They went out and got Harris at the time. That was a move people liked. Then they went out and got Butler. That was a move people liked. They've signed Paul George. They fired Brett Brown and got a guy who won a championship. Then they fired that guy and brought another guy in who won a championship.
Constantly
so they're not going
role players. Yeah.
They have spent money. They have tried everything. So I can't sit here and say that Josh Harris, somebody said he sits in the front row every night. He's constantly sitting right there on the floor watching this team for the last 10 years. He's not some absentee owner who doesn't spend any money. They spend money. He's always there. They take swings. They just haven't worked. And for the most part, give me a move that they have made where we're like, that was a terrible decision. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Sure, they make mistakes, but I can't see where you can sit here and say any one person is to blame for this, which has just been an unbelievable amount of circumstances that you don't even know where the beginning and the end is of the circumstances.
I know. It's a bleep storm. It's been a bleep storm. That is something that cannot be argued, right? If you disagree with that, then I don't believe that you've been watching this team over the years. So we're on the same page there. And you're right? You started that with saying, listen, this is not Joel Embiid's fault, or it's not fair to say it's Joel Embiid's fault. I agree with you. It is not fair to say that. But I look at this team and I assess it over the past 4 or 5 years. And yes, while I can acknowledge there has been a long list of circumstantial evidence that points to a series of unfortunate events, there's been one constant, essentially, and that one constant has been Joel Embiid. And it's not necessarily his fault, literally, But I look at just this team trying to piece together a winning team, as you mentioned, Mike Gill, signing people, adding championship level coaches that have been there and done that, adding championship level role players that have been there and done that. Yet Joel Embiid, fair or foul, he can't seem to be available. And your best ability, cliche time, your best ability is availability. And I'll add this question. Do you believe the Sixers can win a title with Joel Embiid? Whether he's one, two, or third option.
Well, now you're getting to the point of his career where this is about where he should be his best. He's at his 30 years old. This should be his prime season. Unfortunately, I think one of the problems this team had was unreasonable expectations from a young age. Give me a team where your best players are your youngest players and you win titles. I mean, look at Minnesota right now. Their best players, Anthony Edwards, they're not ready to win. Why? They're just not ready. Like, they're young guys. This is a man's league still, whether we like it or not. The men still run this league. We had expectations for the Sixers to win titles when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid were like 23 and 24 years old. That's just not feasible.
But I agree with you. Those expectations are not fair. I would combat it and say, I think the city was more excited than having title expectations. Maybe some people had unrealistic expectations because they had 51 wins. They rattled off 18 of 19 to end that year. Yeah. I'm with you. But I don't think it's unfair to say, okay, the city and the team rallied behind him and they got super excited, right? And like,
that's different, though. You
can today.
You could rally around them and be super excited, but looking back, you're saying, okay, this team never did anything. Well, there's not a lot of players at 23, 24 that lead their team to championships. Those are the stumbling blocks. Those are the ones that you take the losses, you hope to build from them. The problem became they lost in the playoffs a couple times. Well, then Ben Simmons went AWOL. So, like, they never got that chance to kind of go through, okay, we lost, and we lost again, and after, like, the third time, they pulled the plug on the Simmons. Well, Simmons pulled the plug on the whole thing.
He pulled his own plug, yeah.
Exactly. So that, like, went off the rails. And then everything they've done after that has been, now we're trying to bring in James Harden. But the problem with that is James Harden's past his championship level of play. And then you have...
And then he weaseled out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because he wanted a contract. And the Sixers smartly said, I don't know that you're worth that contract. So now you're in this whole thing where the guy wants money, but the team made a fiscal decision that was probably pertinent at the time to say, we don't think you're worth that money. Like, what are you supposed to do? So if you give him the money, then the people are saying, you paid James Harden, he hasn't won anything.
Yeah, I know. And the other problem, and you're sort of outlining this, is in the NBA, you can say whatever you want about the NBA, critical, but you still need continuity and chemistry, right? Like, you bring up the Minnesota Timberwolves. It takes time to become an NBA champion or even a championship contender. And the problem with the 76ers, they've changed their roster every 6 months for the past 5 years.
1,000%. I mean, look right now. Everybody thought the Knicks were going to just, oh, wow, they got Karl Anthony Towns. Yeah. And I said here, I don't think that team's as good as the team that lost last year. They're not as tough. That Hartenstein was a huge factor for that team, and they don't have that interior toughness. That's what separated them, from a Boston team. You can't try to out-offense Boston. You got to try to toughen up and try to, toughen up with Boston. So I don't look at the Knicks at what they did. Now, they might play together for 2 or 3 years, and that might kind of click for them. But why did Milwaukee win that title? Well, you had that Middleton, Lopez, Giannis.
They played
together for like 5-6 tries. The Sixers never got that chance. So I don't know who you want to blame for that. I think some of it's circumstantial. You had a guy like Ben Simmons who you were really good with, and then for whatever reason, he just absolutely, his career took a downward spiral. I don't know what you do with that. Whose fault's that?
It's not Joel Embiid's, right? Obviously, but some of that, listen, the one thing I've always noticed and complained about with Joel Embiid is he just does not seem to want the spotlight in the playoffs. He just, for whatever reason, maybe it's not fair of me to say, I don't really care. He never seems to say, I'm grabbing the bull by the horns. I got this, boys. I'll get us out of the mud in this game 6 on the road, right? Like, he's always shying away from it. It's always the direct opposite. And that's if he's even healthy and available on the basketball floor, Mike Gill. So it's frustrating. And to get back to the point and the question of what or who is the problem, and what do we do with Joel Embiid? I don't believe this team can win a championship with Joel Embiid as long as he's still a 76er. And I tend to agree with you on him not being tradable, but we have seen crazier things in this league. I don't think it's completely out of the question.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing people, though, compare it to Luka. Luka Doncic is 25 years old. Of course
Yeah,
someone's going to trade for him. He's
right.
25 and considered one of the best players in the league. Different from a guy who's 31 with knee problems and still owed $248 million. Now, if Joel was 25, someone might say, okay, but now you're paying him at 32, 33, 34, and 35 years old. No one wants to do that. But the only thing the Sixers can hope for is they got to shut them down and hope that the rest from March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and then the start of the season, that's 9 months worth of rest on that knee, and hope that at 32 years old, this is your prime years. Look, there's a lot of guys in this league. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry.
Oh,
They're all guys, though, that are still playing at a very high level past 32 and 33 and 34 and 35 years old.
sure, but I can't compare Embiid to those guys because those guys have been there and done that. Those guys are champions, and those guys have been available. And Joel Embiid has never been any of those things. And I'll say,
I'm just talking about skill-wise. He's every bit as involved in that conversation as
sure,
an MVP and Olympic. I mean, yes, his availability and
yeah,
his winning track record is not
and
on the same
injuries.
level. I'm just talking about as a guy with the skill set. Those guys are still really good players
Yeah,
at this. Like, this is where 31, 32, you should say, hey, you've had your failures, you've had your losses,
yeah.
and you're hoping at 30, 31, 32 that all of that has taken you to a point where you're now ready to win a championship. And unfortunately, his body has not allowed him to do that.
No, and I agree with the point of you got to shut him down now. Of course, I don't think anyone is thinking anything else other than that point, Mike Gill, right now. But I don't want the Sixers to just do that, right? As we discuss Rye or Cy here, I'll sigh at another thing, and that's Paul George, right? Like, and I'll just start with the question of factoring in everything we talked about with Joel Embiid. What does this team do with Paul George right now and
No,
moving forward?
he's a guy that you got to hope. Look, if you really think that George's season, that injuries derailed his season, then you might say, hey, let's shut him down and then take
Yeah,
a swing with George, Embiid, and Maxey again. Now we found some younger players. We're going to get Jared McCain back. Grimes is a player. Butler's
yeah.
a guy that we like a little bit. We got Lonnie Walker. So now we got some
Yabu.
younger
Yeah.
guys that we could put around those guys. That's probably the way you have to look at this thing, because I don't know how many people are going to want to say, coming off of this season, yeah, I want to pay Paul George for 3 more years at max money.
Yeah, that's the problem with this team is like the demand for all of these guys has never been lower in their careers. So it makes it even that much more challenging to say, all right, let's pick up the phone and see who has interest in a
Yeah,
possible trade.
I liken it to, I said this in the first hour,
Hmm.
they got to take a page from like the WWE. When you have a character who gets stale, you got to write him off the television,
Yeah.
get him off the air for a while, and then when he comes back at some pay-per-view, the place goes nuts. Like, dude, we haven't seen that, because right now, nobody wants to see these characters. So you need to freshen them up and do something different and then bring them back next season.
I think they should shut down Maxey too. I think that should be priority number one. Like, this team needs to tank. Let's go back to the process. Let's tank. Let's not forget about shutting Embiid down. Forget about shutting George down. Shut everybody down. I'll play the rest of the year. Like, let's lose every game we can lose. I want to be in the Cooper flag running. Like, seriously, let's lose every game. That needs to be the mindset. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, a couple things. Number one, Cooper Flagg has said that he wants to go back to school. So everybody's going for a guy who's probably not going to be in the draft. And I don't see
We'll
why.
see.
Right, he might change his mind, but a lot of
Yeah.
indications are he likes it there and he wants to go back. And by the way, he has enough NIL money
Yeah.
that he doesn't need to go
Right.
to the league right now. So,
Yeah.
everybody who thinks that Cooper Flagg, one, yes, obviously, getting a draft choice is paramount for this team right now. They have the problem of they're not the worst team in the league, though. So you're not going to be one of the worst teams in the league. You're well,
They're
there's
pretty
teams right-
bad.
Yeah,
They're
but
not
they
that
have
far off.
They are right now the 6th or 7th worst team in the league. There's teams that I believe still have single-digit wins. The
Yeah,
Sixers have
but
20. The Sixers have 20 wins. I think there's teams that have like that still don't have 10.
right. I don't know where exactly they're at, but I know they're in 12th place in the East. I mean, they're not necessarily.
Well, they're only a game and a half behind the Bulls. If they beat the Bulls tonight, they're going to only be a half a game behind them.
Well, and that's the problem, right? It's a lot has happened in a couple